Europe is entering a dangerous new phase. Blackouts, airspace restrictions, and silent military moves are no longer rumors, they are signals. While billions in frozen assets are being quietly discussed behind closed doors, new pressure points are emerging on Europe's eastern edge and even far beyond the continent. Strategic meetings, shadow fronts, and escalating air power suggest the war is approaching a decisive turn. Who is preparing for what, and what moment are we being pushed toward? All the answers and warning signs in our special edition of Hotspot. A grim reckoning awaits Putin's Russia. Prolonged blackouts, failing infrastructure, and chronic water shortages beyond the so-called border of civilization are becoming a likely reality for millions of Russians by 2026. Ukraine's sustained pressure is increasingly exposing the Kremlin's deep structural weaknesses, both on the battlefield and at home. We'll break down what's driving this trajectory and bring you the latest updates from the front line in our full military review.
A disaster for Russia from the Ukrainian armed forces. Ukrainians are responding to the Russians' blackout with a blackout of their own. As the Russians themselves write, there has never been such a critical number of drones before. The strike on the Dorogobush thermal power plant in the Smolensk region has been confirmed. A bright fire broke out in the area of the strike. Drones also struck the Akron plant in Veliki Novgorod, which produces fertilizers, some components of which are also used to make explosives. A fire also broke out at the site. The mayor of Moscow reported that 31 drones were allegedly shot down over the capital during the night.
This is the use of up to 300 aerodynamic strike assets. This is a record number. The Russians are forced to acknowledge the very fact that the Ukrainian side is scaling up its use of strike drones and improving their tactical and technical characteristics.
Ukraine is using the Long Neptune, Palyanitsia, Flamingo, and Sapsan missiles. At the same time, some of the strikes remain indeterminate for the enemy in terms of the type of weapon used.
The Ukrainian defense forces are also armed with the Long Neptune. The strike range is about 1,000 kilometers. In addition, there is the S-200 surface-to-air missile system modified for strikes against ground targets. The Russian side was forced to acknowledge the successful use of S-200 surface-to-air missile systems, let me note, still of Soviet manufacture, against air bases located on the territory of the occupying country. These are Milerovo and Baltimore.
President Volodymyr Zelensky noted that there are many instances when our enemy believes that Neptunes were used.
At the moment, the Ukrainian president has announced the scaling up of Ukraine's ballistic missile program. First and foremost, this concerns the possibility of scaling up the production of the Flamingo in 3 modifications, with target engagement ranges of 200 kilometers, 800, and 3,000.
The security service of Ukraine struck the Filonovsky oil production platform, which belongs to Lukoil Nizhne Volzhkneft, according to journalists. This is the first strike on Russian oil infrastructure in the Caspian Sea. At least 4 hits have been recorded. Oil and gas extraction from more than 20 wells has been completely halted.
Previously, the main focus was on oil refining enterprises, oil refineries located within the Russian Federation, but now accordingly, strikes are also being carried out directly on oil and gas production sites. Such strikes are specifically and strategically aimed at blocking the very possibility of oil and gas extraction operations for the energy needs of the Russian Federation and its allies.
As of December 11th, the total combat losses of Russian troops in Ukraine have reached almost 1,500 personnel. In the past 24 hours, the enemy has also lost 7 armored combat vehicles, 23 artillery systems, and 82 drones.
Under the cover of thick fog, Ukrainian defense forces managed to bring heavy armored vehicles into Myrnohrad, and according to the Russian side's own assessment, Ukrainian tanks have significantly slowed the advance of Russian assault groups.
In the video, you can see the process, so to speak, of the work itself. Specifically, how Ukrainian fighters eliminate Russian troops in the Pokrovsk direction, which has been a tough challenge for Putin for over a year now.
The Kremlin has opened a new front around Transnistria. On the territory of Moldova, temporarily occupied by Russia, mobilization measures have sharply intensified. Reservists are being summoned to the so-called armed formations of the unrecognized entity. Weapon stockpiles are being taken out of long-term storage, and according to multiple reports, drone production has been launched to support Russian occupying forces. How is Chisinau responding to these developments? And is the moment approaching for Moldova to reclaim territories long held under Kremlin control? We break it all down in our full report.
Moscow is stepping up its activities in the occupied region of Moldova to divert Ukraine's resources by increasing the threat from the Russian enclave. Military units and quasi-formations are calling up reservists, and weapons are being taken out of storage at the depots.
The discussion turned to the repeated detentions and hours-long searches of Transnistrian residents at the Chisinau airport. The Transnistrian side has demanded that Moldova stop its pressure. Complaints about the actions of the Moldovan authorities are also being submitted to the public chamber of Transnistria. In
Transnistria, production of UAVs and a drone operator training center have been established. This was also stated by Alexandru Bujorian, the mayor of Leova, in September.
According to our information, Russia is trying to organize drone production on the territory of Transnistria. We have the specific names of two factories in Tiraspol. We are talking about Moldavizolit and Electromash.
The pro-Kremlin newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda reported on the information about drone production in Transnistria.
Normal, strong, good neighborly relations and the complete absence of any conflict, both originating from Ukraine and from Moldova.
Moscow is sending intelligence agents to Transnistria who have been tasked with sowing chaos through information operations and carrying out provocations. The Russian Federation hopes to destabilize the situation in Moldova and on the border with the southern regions of Ukraine. Due to the actions of the Russians, the risk of sabotage groups infiltrating our country is increasing. If necessary, the Kremlin will be able to use the resources it has accumulated for escalation.
As for the relations with the Russian Federation, they are much more transparent, considerably more understandable to me personally, and indeed more stable and enduring.
The Kremlin has established a state there with an isolated banking system, a non-convertible currency, and a massive level of corruption. In Transnistria, almost every second company belongs to the oligarch Gushan,
who controls a significant part of the PMR's economy. According to some reports, Sheriff provides more than 50% of the region's tax revenue, and tens of thousands of people work at the holding's enterprises. Back in 2015, Gushan was called one of the richest people in the post-Soviet space, and his fortune was estimated at $2.1 billion.
Ukraine froze Gushan's assets because his companies supplied goods and services to Russia's military-industrial complex.
And according to the Moldovan State Services Agency, as of 2024, Moldavizolit continued supplying goods to the neighboring country. The Ukrainian investigation claims that goods or services from the Moldavizolit company ended up in Russian defense system structures that produced weapons used in the war against Ukraine. This creates a legal link between assets associated with the Sheriff holding company.
This is yet another blow to Putin's war machine. Previously, another blow was the fact that after Gazprom stopped supplying gas at the beginning of 2025, gas to Transnistria has been coming from Moldova gas.
The energy crisis in Transnistria, which triggered an economic crisis, is ongoing and it threatens to turn into a real humanitarian catastrophe.
In addition to the resources with which Putin bribed his enclave, he also provided Transnistria with political and military support, maintaining his own military contingent there.
It is necessary to thoroughly examine what the Russian operational group of forces actually is and to propose appropriate solutions for dismantling this structure. But at the same time, there is also the so-called Transnistrian army on the left bank. At 12 Manoilova Street in Tiraspol, there is the so-called Ministry of State Security, which is something like an analog of the KGB or NKVD and keeps the residents of the left bank in fear. There are various types of special battalions.
The separatists are armed with grads, drones, and even helicopters and tanks. Russia could also mobilize civilians from Transnistria to whom Putin has distributed plans to join the European Union in the coming years. To achieve this, the Moldovan authorities are obliged to address the conflict in the Dniester.
As for the actual resolution of the conflict in Moldova, we are committed to facilitating a negotiation process that will involve both the Transnistrian side and our supporting international partners, first and foremost the European Union, the United States, and the OSCE.
In order to keep its protégé in power, Russia launched a hybrid operation related to the so-called presidential elections in the PMR. In 2026,
Russia has acted and continues to act as a guarantor of the Transnistrian settlement.
Putin's main goal in Transnistria remains to make Tiraspol dependent again, improve the image of the local pro-Russian leaders, and quietly increase the number of military personnel in the region. So instead of dealing with his own economic and political problems, Putin is focused on militarizing the territories he has occupied.
Poland is partially closing its airspace over Ukraine as military cooperation deepens. Earlier, the General Staff of the Polish Armed Forces confirmed ongoing talks about transferring a large batch of MiG-29 fighter jets to Kyiv, a move that could significantly improve the balance on the battlefield. At the same time, Ukraine's air fleet is being reinforced with Western aircraft, including French Mirage fighters and Gripen jets, expanding both defensive and strike capabilities. How these reinforcements will strengthen Ukraine's air power and what new operational opportunities they open up is the focus of our report.
Ukraine has strengthened its positions in the sky. Volodymyr Zelensky announced the reinforcement of the Ukrainian Armed Forces air fleet.
Every visit, every negotiation always brings practical results for our defense, for our resilience. Today, our combat aviation has been reinforced. Thank you. The details are not public yet, but we are constantly gaining strength in the sky.
Which specific systems or aircraft are we talking about? It is unknown, but at the same time, the Polish General Staff reported negotiations with Ukraine regarding the transfer of MiG-29 fighter jets to Kyiv. As part of the deal, Ukrainians will receive MiGs and the Poles will get technologies for joint production of drones and missiles.
We are pleased to inform you that negotiations are underway with Ukraine regarding the transfer of MiG-29 aircraft. The transfer of the aircraft is due to them having reached their operational lifespan and the lack of prospects for their further modernization within the Polish Armed Forces. We also inform you that a final decision has not yet been made. The transfer of the aircraft will be part of the alliance's policy to support Ukraine and ensure the security of NATO's eastern flank. The tasks currently performed by the MiG-29s being withdrawn will be carried out by F-16 and Fa-50 aircraft.
In addition to operating Soviet models, Ukraine is actively introducing Western fighter jets into its fleet. In November, Kyiv signed an agreement with Paris and Stockholm to produce Swedish Gripens and French Rafales for the Ukrainian armed forces.
The production rate for Rafales is 3 aircraft per month. This is much more than the production of Gripens, which is only 12 aircraft per year. And France plans to increase production to 5 aircraft per month. In
the case of the French Rafales, Ukraine potentially receives not just a fighter jet, but also a DCS-linked node for the diverse fleet of Western aircraft supplied to the Ukrainian armed forces.
Networked interaction, in other words, makes it possible to effectively unite all that zoo of aircraft that has been transferred to the Ukrainian side. These are the F-16s, Mirages, and accordingly the Rafales themselves, as well as the possible transfer of Gripens. All of this enables the use of the Rafale F4 specifically as a key node in the combat network. That is, in effect, at the moment of interaction with other aircraft and air defense systems, it creates a unified air defense complex.
Western fighters such as the Rafale, F-16, Gripen, and Mirage have an advantage over their Russian counterparts when it comes to internal systems. This ranges from electronic warfare equipment and detection radars to modern missiles. Air-to-air.
This fighter has received a modernized radar, which is capable of operating under electronic warfare countermeasures. Additionally, the front sector optoelectronic system allows this fighter to detect targets better at long distances and under more challenging conditions.
But under the current combat conditions, fighters, whether Soviet MiGs, American F-16S, or French Rafales, are primarily used as air defense assets to repel massive enemy missile and drone attacks.
The United States has presented Europe with a framework for rebuilding Ukraine. The administration of President Donald Trump has circulated a series of documents to European partners outlining Washington's vision for Ukraine's post-war recovery. According to the documents, U.S. financial institutions and major businesses are seeking access to nearly $200 billion in Russian assets frozen in Europe, which are expected to serve as key funding source for reconstruction projects in Ukraine. Trump did not leave Moscow out of the equation either. Want to hear all the details? Watch now.
While the fate of Ukrainian cities is being decided on the front lines, across the ocean a plan is being developed that is supposed to help rebuild Ukraine after the war. At first glance, it sounds encouraging, almost like the long-awaited signal of support. But let's take a closer look at what really lies behind this move. As the Wall Street Journal reports, just recently the administration of US President Donald Trump handed over to its allies a series of brief, almost laconic documents. Within these few paragraphs is hidden a new vision for the post-war order of the continent, in which the fate of Ukraine and the future of Russia are closely intertwined, and not at all in the way Europe had expected.
The documents contain plans for American financial companies and other businesses to gain access to approximately $200 billion in frozen Russian assets for the implementation of projects in Ukraine, among which in particular is the idea of building a massive data center that would be powered by electricity from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant.
According to the publication, American officials assure their allies that this approach will help accelerate peace and at the same time attract additional investors to Ukraine. From the heads of the largest financial corporations to billionaires ready to invest in large-scale projects. Moreover, some documents state that the amount needed for reconstruction could rise to $400, and according to some estimates, even up to $800 billion if the model is fully implemented.
So, what are the United States of America proposing? As of today, in the list of how they want to see the post-war order, including how they want to see Russia in this world system, this is far from new. The position of the United States of America has been evident ever since. First, the full-scale invasion in 2022.
But it is the second part of the plan that sparks much more debate, which many European officials have called an economic Yalta. Washington is proposing not just to use Russian assets, but at the same time to launch a process of bringing the Russian economy out of international isolation. According to the document, American companies will be given the opportunity to invest in strategic sectors of the Russian economy, from rare earth metal extraction to drilling in the Arctic. Moreover, the plan envisions US assistance in restoring the flow of Russian oil and gas to Europe, the very same flows that the continent has been painfully but persistently giving up for the past 3 years.
All of this points to a systematic effort by the United States of America to establish a path toward controlling the Russian Federation on the one hand, and on the other to secure sales. Seeing the position of the European Union, which has decided to completely phase out by 2027, having made this decision for 2027, to give up Russian energy resources, the United States of America made the decision to replace Russian energy resources with their own, but under American documentation. And something similar is planned to be done with the frozen assets as well. As we can see, some European countries are blocking Ukraine's access to these resources. Likewise, the American side is also blocking Ukraine's access to the frozen assets. Everything is heading toward the United States lobbying for the interests of the Russian Federation in one way or another, pushing for their return to the world stage, including as a supplier of energy resources.
For Europe, the American plan sounds like an attempt to open the door for the Kremlin. At a time when the war is not yet over and the threat of a renewed attack remains more than real, in the EU, they are convinced that this strategy undermines the very logic of sanctions, which was based on the idea that the aggressor should pay for starting the war, not gain new opportunities.
Indonesia's president has traveled to meet Vladimir Putin for the second time this year, a move that did not go unnoticed. During the talks with President Subianto, Putin placed special emphasis on cooperation in the so-called military-technical sphere, a deliberately vague phrase that often masks discussions on arms supplies, defense technologies, and strategic alignment. What is really hidden behind this careful diplomatic wording? And why is the Kremlin leader himself now reportedly preparing a visit to Indonesia? We break down Moscow's objectives and the broader geopolitical implications next in our report.
While the West is ramping up sanctions and international pressure, Russia is moving towards a new axis of cooperation. And this time, the second key meeting took place in the Kremlin with the president of Indonesia.
Eventually, she will completely let go.
Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto is back in Moscow, and this is already his second visit this year. This time, they discussed energy, agriculture, and military cooperation. But what is really behind this visit?
Of the hidden motives, the only truly plausible thing that seems entirely possible to me is formal agreements concerning the extradition of individuals who ultimately end up residing in Indonesia. This would be at the specific request of the relevant Russian authorities, of course.
Of course, not a single meeting between Putin and the leaders of other countries goes without a discussion of military technology.
We have traditionally very reliable relations in the field of military technical cooperation. Indonesia is our traditional partner in this area. Our cooperation is developing and is at a good level of professional interaction.
Of course, the Kremlin is eager to expand such deals, especially now that the Western market is closed.
First and foremost, this is, of course, various military equipment. Whether it's airplanes or tanks, really. Basically, whatever they need. One way or another, Russia will still be able to produce something, perhaps even a significant amount. And in a situation where budget problems are growing more severe and challenging by the day, having a country to which you can reliably supply weapons and military equipment is certainly more of an undeniable advantage and a strategic benefit.
Putin also didn't overlook the Indonesian people living in Russia.
Indonesian specialists are constantly being trained at our universities, including military academies, and we are ready to expand this cooperation.
But what could that mean?
Today, Putin is catastrophically short on cannon fodder. So among the shadow negotiations, there may be discussions about how Indonesian citizens could fight in the Russian army. I wouldn't rule out that such shadow negotiations have taken place. What would be the format so that the state, Indonesia, doesn't get too tainted by this story?
The Kremlin dictator also confirmed his willingness to help Indonesia with its plans to develop nuclear energy and to build its first nuclear power plant.
For the Kremlin, this is extremely profitable. And again, let's not forget that Rosatom is now also a cash cow for people close to Putin. Rosatom is a significant contributor to the Russian budget. And accordingly, yes, of course, the expansion of Rosatom's influence in the world is something that greatly concerns and worries Putin.
The Indonesian president also extended an invitation to Putin to visit his country.
I would like to sincerely and warmly invite you to experience the beautiful country of Indonesia at a time that is convenient for you. Perhaps this will be possible in 2026 or 2027. We will adjust to your schedule and would be very happy to welcome you to our country.
There was even a rather playful jab, in addition, at the reclusive bunker dweller.
Off-screen, 2 people. You can't just keep flying to India after all.
The thing is, just last week Putin visited India, where similar issues were discussed: trade, military cooperation, and economic ties.
This is a routine round to gather some trump cards for negotiations with Trump. Because in fact, the foreign policy strategy of the Trump administration has openly stated that their main interest is the Asia-Pacific region. And so, where is Putin right now? In the Asia-Pacific region, Indonesia, India.
Thus, in order not to lose one of the last major buyers of Russian oil, Putin had to make serious concessions.
Putin promised India stable oil supplies and discounts of up to $20 per barrel.
It turns out that the meetings with India and Indonesia are not a coincidence. Moscow is strengthening contacts wherever possible. India gets favorable oil terms, Indonesia gains access to technology and grain, and Russia strengthens its partnerships.
Putin decidedly chose to gather some significant geopolitical trump cards in order to effectively offset the challenging situation, which is currently proving quite difficult with Ukraine, primarily because Putin absolutely does not want to make any substantial concessions on the critical Ukrainian issue. That means he absolutely needs to collect some other significant trump cards to effectively force, or at the very least persuade, Donald Trump to completely abandon not only the crucial situation in Ukraine, but also the broader strategic interests of Europe as a whole.
At this moment, that's all from me, Maria Farafonova. Even more hellish frontline news in our next episode. But for now, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon!